Happy Sunday morning. I come to you this morning with a mini message, and I'm going to try to get it done in about 3 minutes from 1 Samuel 15. I was reading and it says, "One day Samuel said to Saul, 'I anointed you king of Israel because the Lord told me to.'" I think Samuel was getting a little tired of King Saul's arrogant behavior. "Now listen to this message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I've decided to settle accounts with the nation of Amalek for opposing Israel when they came from Egypt. Now go and completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys." And we know what happened. Saul gathered his army around him and they went to annihilate the people. But he spared King Agag's life. And it says in verse 9, Saul and his men spared Agag's life and kept the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything in fact that appealed to them. They destroyed only what was worthless or of poor quality. King Saul had a responsibility as the leader of the Israelites to set before them an example of selflessness, of being more interested in obedience toward God than his own self-interests. And King Saul did not do that. He did not set a good example before the people, and the people began to follow his example of being arrogant, of choosing reason, their own reason, above obedience to God. When God gives a command to us, we are to obey, regardless of what we think of it, regardless of how we might reason ourselves away from obeying him. And then the Lord said to Samuel in verse 10, "I am sorry that I ever made Saul king, for he has not been loyal to me and has turned again against me and refused to obey me." It's not that God is saying I made a mistake. It's that he said, I allowed what the people asked and made Saul king. But Saul chose not to obey me and chose not to follow me. Saul could have been a good king. But it was Saul's decision whether he was going to follow the Lord or whether he was going to follow his own interests. And I think the icing on the cake comes in verse 12. "Early the next morning, Samuel went to find Saul, and someone told him, 'Saul went to Carmel to set up a monument to himself.'" I think that pretty much solidifies the heart that King Saul had developed by that point. The Bible says that King Saul reigned for 42 years. That must have been a long 42 years for Samuel as he was watching Saul drift further and further away from God's commands. So to bring it home, I just want to say two things this morning. When we have the opportunity to give other people credit, instead of taking credit for ourselves, we need to give it. Saul should have been giving credit to God for the things that God had done on his behalf and the Israelite people, but he chose not to. He chose to set up a monument to himself. And also, we are to obey, obviously, and I keep saying that nearly week after week, but a lot of times we choose to reason our way out of obedience. We want to trust our own instincts. We want to trust our own ability to think through a situation. When God says, "I didn't ask you to think about it. I just asked you to obey me." So in our hearts, we need to decide from the beginning, and really that's what humility is to decide from the get-go, when I read this word, when God speaks to me and gives me a word, I am to obey. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and go to church. I'm headed there, and I will see you next week.